Hey, and thanks for dropping in for the Tech Comm Tools podcast. I am here with, I'm going to read this so I don't get them wrong. I am here with Kit Brown-Hoekstra, who is, among other things, an STC Fellow and our current sitting president for 2014-15. She is the Society President, which is phenomenal. She is the owner of CommGenesis. They specialize in localization, content strategy, and content management. Her co-presenter for LavaCon is going to be Terena Bell, and she is the CEO of In Every Language. And real quick, the title of their presentation is going to be What a Bagel Shop Can Teach Us About Community Experience. And Terena, I wanted to start off with you. You and I are just meeting for the first time today, so tell me a little bit about In Every Language.
Well, we are actually, year before last, we were the only translation company in North America voted to a seat on the GALA board, which is the International Trade Association. And then also we work with our customers to move translation from a cost center to a profit driver. Because basically, Matt, if translation costs you more than you make from translation, you're either translating the wrong things or you're translating it wrong.
Good to know. Good to know. I have a client that is just moving from about $150,000 annual localization cost to somewhere about $30,000 via structure. So,
Yeah,
there's a lot of drivers there to be aware of.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
great. And Kit, anything else you want to talk about with CommGenesis real quick?
Well, actually, the title of our presentation is The Space Between Us.
The space between us. Oh, look at that. So somehow I managed to get... I gave the title to Marissa Peacock's presentation. I am so sorry.
That's wonderful, so that's fine.
Yeah, the space between us, managing expectations between Tec Comm and Localization.
Right.
Well, there you go. All right. So now that we got that straight and everybody's stress level comes down because you're not going to be winging it about a bagel shop for half an hour.
Yeah, no worries. So this talk kind of came out of a conversation that Terena and I had at Localization World a couple of years ago,
Okay.
Where we were talking about how we're getting more and more questions, on the content management side about localization and on the localization side about content management and how to incorporate localization into and pull it upstream more into the content development process. And as you pointed out with your client, there's a lot of cost drivers and a lot of market drivers that are pushing that streamlining of structuring the content, the source content, and building better global content so that it can be localized more effectively.
Right, and we ran into that particularly with implementing STE, which for those who may be listening that are new to content management, that's short for Simplified Technical English, to where we had a client that Kit and I both already knew each other, but I don't even think we realized that we shared the client until Kit had already come and done the on-site visit, which was like 3 miles from my house, which was kind of crazy. And we were talking about it at Localization World Seattle. And the reason was the client was brand new to us. They were actually in the process of transitioning to us from their prior language services provider. And they brought Kit in, and Kit was doing the session on how to implement STE as somebody brand new to the system. And she was like, well, who are you going to be working with for translation? They said, well, right now we're with so-and-so, but next month we're moving to In Every Language. And she was just like, oh, I know them. This is going to work fine, and they know what they're doing with this stuff. But what has happened has been Kit got them implemented, but in the up and running of it, there were issues that came up to where I'd say, so-and-so, I think that's a better Kit question. Or they'd go to Kit, and Kit would be like, I think it's a Terena question. And a lot of that area, it made us realize that in a world where we're all just trying to help, because from my side, from the localization side, I had to learn about content management in order to better serve and to know what I'm talking about and to even know what's a Kit question and to inform a client as to when maybe it's time for them to work with somebody like one of the two of you. And then also y'all have to know from the same end, because we all have to add value beyond whatever the core is that we do, because there's all of this ancillary around everything else that we do. For example, like what we found with STE was they had a very large translation memory from before they went to STE. And so, yes, we're going to save this amount of money by going to STE, but how much are we going to lose because our source language has completely changed now?
Right.
Now, just real quick for those that aren't in localization, translation memory being that reusable portion of the translation. So the way I'm hearing that is you had a huge cost savings by going to simplified English, but at the same time you have an additional cost because now all the STE needs to be localized on that first go round.
Well, exactly. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, or the translation memory needs to be aligned. Depending on how significant the changes are, sometimes it's easier to align the translation memory than to completely relocalize too. So it depends on how it's set up and everything, and that's really more of a Terena question, but I get a lot of those questions when I do the simplified technical English training,
right? Because
they're like trying to understand how this whole process is going to affect everything else that they do. And the simplified technical English is a great example because it requires senior technical writers who've been doing it the same way for 15 years to think about their work completely differently and to approach their writing completely differently. And that's often the hardest hurdle, more so than the idea of having a tool to help them, help them track and manage the simplification itself and the editing process itself. So, it's pretty. The other thing was when I saw Terena's presentation at Loc World, I was like, oh yeah, somebody else who has the same energy level as me. So we're
I jump about and I give away bourbon. Sorry, go ahead.
Guess whose session I'm going to.
So I think we're going to have a lot of fun talking about this because we're both very passionate about the whole process and the space. Both of us really feel like we work in that space between localization and Tec Comm at this point.
Right, and that's just the reality of it. Like when I talk about moving translation from a cost center to a profit driver, if all someone is doing is translating, that's not really going to happen because it leaves all of it on the client. So when you look at the fact that, at least from the localization and translation side, we're operating in a world where the price per word is getting lower and lower and lower. And then you add on the discounts for the translation memory, or as Matt explained it earlier, basically you're repeating words and phrases, and that's also getting lower and lower. So, what is the value? Like, why pay 20 cents a word, for example, for Spanish, when you can get some 12-year-old in El Salvador to do it for $4? Well, what do you get for that other 16 cents? You get knowledge, you get understanding, you get people who can help you figure out what to translate and when to translate it so that you make your money back off of that money. And so whenever you're basically giving that advice, which I say is for free, but it is kind of wrapped in your per word price that you pay because you're not paying 4 cents to a 12-year-old in El Salvador. You're paying for a grown adult who may be in El Salvador, may not, but whenever you wrap around what everything else is that is with that, it's going to fall into content management because we're talking about translation management at that point. And translation is content. It's just your content in multiple languages.
Right, which adds a whole nother level of complexity to the content management system, to the content strategy, all of those things that we as technical communicators are used to thinking about. It's like now we have to multiply that by 15 or 20 languages.
Exactly.
And, as the example, Matt, that you gave with your client going from spending $150,000 to spending $30,000, what's going to happen with that money that they're not spending is that's not going to go away. That's going to go into other markets and other languages that they couldn't afford to go into before. So just like with technical communication being content as a business asset, the translation is also a business asset because in many cases you can't sell in that country unless you have local content. If I have a choice between a piece of software that's written in my native language and a piece of software that is obviously not optimized for my locale, and the features are basically the same, I'm going to pick the one that's more comfortable to me. And that's true of everybody. So the line used to be that you go 80% of the way to localization, or people used to be just happy to have it in their own language. now customers are becoming more sophisticated and demanding. And so they not only want it in their own language, but they want it optimized for their locale. They want it, they want it at the same time the rest of the world is getting it. So if you want to do simultaneous release worldwide, you can't wait until 6 weeks before your product release to start localization. You have to pull that screen.
And if you don't have that one language ready whenever the other language is, now this isn't an example in a multilingual. This is an English-only example, but I live in Washington, D.C. Okay, Washington, D.C., for those who remember from, fourth grade social studies class, is not a state. It's purposefully not a state. That's how our nation was set up. But what happens, like if I go to order something from Amazon or Macy's or wherever online, whenever there's the drop down for which state I'm in, I select DC because that's what goes into the mail slot. There was a pizza app, and I kind of felt bad after I saw the way that everybody was beating them up online because it turns out it was started by like these high schoolers. But there was a pizza app that they...
Well, don't feel too bad for them then.
Well, I mean, they were like, they're 17, like, what do you expect? But still, they came up with a pizza app that was, I think it was like in the New York Times last week and all kinds of things like that, to where you push a button, and it's kind of like Uber for pizza. To where you push a button and it just orders, like, I guess, wherever the closest pizza is that is programmed for the kind of pizza that you like. And the whole thing is I'm too lazy to actually go through with ordering a pizza. I just want to hit a button. Again, designed by high schoolers, probably for high schoolers. But when they put the state in, they neglected to put Washington, D.C. because they just uploaded the 50 states.
50 states. Yeah.
Which meant anybody in D.C. couldn't order a pizza from their app.
And Puerto Rico.
Right, yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think Puerto Rico was in there either, but I'm sure that Puerto Rico has some sort of weird, like, Quebecois-ish, rules about ordering a pizza. I don't know. But exactly, like, that was my next thought, was what about Puerto Rico? Yeah. But the thing about it is their idea of fixing it whenever people started complaining wasn't, oh, gosh, let's add D.C. They said, just put Washington, D.C. as the full city and then select Virginia as your state. So all these people driving around with taxation without representation license plates that are all very bitter about not being a state are like, what do you mean put Virginia as my state? So I realize that doesn't have much to do with different languages, but it does have to do with needing to be fully cognizant of what has got to roll out for whom at the same time. And how do you handle that whenever it's brought to your attention that, oh, whoops, we forgot Puerto Rico, we forgot D.C., we forgot the French or whatever. Because that happens. If you're not ordering translation on a daily basis, maybe the department that maybe sales has not communicated to you that they've started selling in France, or maybe production has not communicated to you that this machine is also going to go out to Belgium because the Belgian client is brand new or something like that. You may not know to do that. So it goes into what Kit was talking about earlier about the earlier that we can catch things, like even a small mistake, because none of us are perfect. So even a small mistake that you think would be just fine, because it's only one small mistake. Whenever you multiply that, like say this is the mistake. So you multiply it times Spanish, and you multiply it times French, and you multiply it times German, and you multiply it times Chinese. And it just gets so huge, and next thing you know, people are bitching you out on Twitter because you think Washington, D.C. is in Virginia, you can't order a pizza. But yeah. It just magnifies.
More to your point, though, in a few of those examples, it's not so much you made a mistake here, but it is that it's meeting your audience where they need to be. Right. And it's making them feel like they're, like they're real and they're equal and all of those things that we all want to be validated on.
Well, I think Terena made a great point with the localization, that it's not just language to language, it's within borders as well.
Right. And nobody from Mexico wants to click on a Spanish flag on your website.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And exactly. So the other piece of that, as part of the global content strategy, when we're trying to get content, the content that the person needs, when, where, and how they need it, and in the right format and in the right amount, that applies exponentially to other languages as well. So we have to be considering those when we're designing for mobile, for example. How do we accommodate Russian and German that are typically the biggest text expansion when you do translation? How do we accommodate that on the mobile screen when there's barely room for the English?
Yeah, especially if somebody's doing technical language, like a material safety data sheet or something like that. You know, for German, can just
right.
Yeah.
And one of the metrics that I often use in one of my classes on teaching people how to create content for localization is, if you can do it in the source, if it costs you $100 to fix an error in the source, multiply that by the number of languages. So if you are translating something into 20 languages, that's $2,000 for that one error.
Yeah.
So now multiply that by the number of errors that you have in your source content, and that's how much it's costing you every year just for those errors. So just fixing the error generation at the source level, just fixing the template issues at the source will save you 30% on your localization. And that 30% means that you can then maybe go into a market that you couldn't afford to go into.
Yep.
Yeah, or hire somebody new to do something else, or keep the money yourself if you're the owner.
Well, and I mentioned that, you know, that significant cost savings for my client, that funds a lot of projects that are out on the fringe.
Right.
Because, you know, you've got what has to be done, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, wait, we got this under control. Where can we also achieve that sort of ROI?
Right. And then the issue too with that, it's catching it early, not just for cost savings in the future, but because we have run into issues. We had this come up with a client yesterday, and I was training a brand new project manager and getting her to understand, look, you know, this is their decision. But it was an instance to where the translation memory that came from the former language service provider was bad. Mm-hmm. You know, the translations in there were just horrible. And she's like, you know, I know that, you know, we gave them the quote because we use what is called leverage, which in our industry, that's the discount, like the actual financial discount that you get for the repeating words. You know, there's one level of discount for if it's an exact match, and then there's another level of discount for if it's a match, like in a different context. Like the man in the blue hat was feeling blue. That's a different context, so it's not going to be as deep of a discount as the man in the blue hat wearing the blue jacket sat on the blue bench, you know, or the man in the blue hat took off his blue hat, you know, so like there are levels of context to where things are similar. But what had happened was they wanted their translation memory discount, and we had quoted that to them, and we got in there, and the translation memory was just piss poor, you know, to just pardon my language. Yeah. And she's like, you know, we can't use this. And she goes, we're going to replace it. And I said, well, hold on. You know, we can't replace it across the board. One, you need to let them know, you know, that this is poor coming over, because that memory exists for a reason. Like, people just don't enter terms that they think are swell into it and then build on it. You know, it means that some other document was translated. And one of the goals of translation memory, it's great that it saves you money, but really it's there for speed and for consistency.
And quality.
You said for quality. Yes, exactly. Exactly, to improve quality through consistency. And I told her, I said, that is in there because it exists in another document. And I have heard, you know, I've heard people speak at Localization World and say that they have left things incorrect in the memory because they were too far embedded in using this term, you know, that they've used this term for the last 5 years. This term is on their website. This term is on their packaging. This term is on their like handouts that go with it. You know, this term is in customs documents. And they're like, we can't just start using another term because we've used this term for the last 5 years. You know, so that's one reason, too, why it's great to fix it early, because not only does it save you money in the future and save you with that exact project, but you've got to think about, and not necessarily the long tail of content, because it's a slightly different concept, but you've got to think whenever it's being translated, it's going into a repository. It's going into a bank. And the whole point of translation memory is that this term or this sentence may not come up again for 5 years. But when it does, it's in there. You know, so you're creating an issue that you're going to have to deal with, you know, in some cases 5 years down the road.
Right, and this is why terminology management and in-country review are so critical. And the terminology management, honestly, the localization industry is much more mature than the documentation industry on the terminology management, because frankly, most tech writers have a spreadsheet on their desktop, and that's how they manage their glossary for their particular project. They don't necessarily share that information with everybody else on their team, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're in a content management environment. And that's one of the reasons why going from unstructured to structured in content management is so challenging, because it exposes all of these issues, these dirty little secrets that you've done just to get by and get through a project. You know, I keep that spreadsheet because that's the only way I can keep track of all the terminology and make sure I'm being consistent across all of the help and the manual and the website and all of the other content I'm working on. And also so that when I'm working with the project team, I can say, dude, you can't call it that, because, you know, in this other product, we're calling the same thing this thing, you know. But there's it becomes this huge political minefield once you because it really needs to be handled above the project level. It needs to be handled cross-functionally and at the corporate level in order to be managed properly. And that's where the localization companies can really provide some value add, because most of them have professional terminologists, if not on staff, at least accessible to them, where they can help with that political minefield that can be their terminology management.
See, and that's why I'm an advocate of it being the same department, because it's all content. You know, I don't understand, and I guess sometimes like if a company is just so huge that you have to, because maybe you've got 20 content writers and you've got 5 localization managers, you know, or whatever, you know, like somebody like the size of Google, you know, I can kind of maybe understand why it's divided there, but to me, like the client that we shared that I was joking about earlier, where she flew in and, you know, they were just right down the road from my house. There are 3 content creators there, and 2 of them also handle localization. Mm-hmm. You know, and it makes it so. And of course, they're a medium-sized manufacturer. It's a smaller example than someone, you know, like a Google or something like that. But to me, it's like, I don't know, like peanut butter and jelly may be in 2 different jars, but they've got to go on the same sandwich together. So why would you put them on different sides of your kitchen?
Because I understand where you're coming from, but there's also, it's more than just the user content though. There's also the training material, which is often a different department. There's the localization, which is a different department. There's marketing, which is a different department.
It's decentralized.
Content reuse. Yeah.
There's product development. So if you're doing software, or even in a lot of cases hardware, there's content that's being developed by the developers.
Marketing's always off doing its own thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, marketing. Yeah, who knows what marketing's off doing? But you know, these kinds of issues are what are giving big, medium, and large companies heartburn, and what is increasing their localization costs and their liability and their risk. And so this is also where having that in-country review can really help. And what a lot of people don't understand is that in-country review process is something that the client owns, not the localization provider. Right. And yet, it's one of the biggest bugaboos in the localization process when it's done poorly, because that in-country reviewer can put a halt to the localization of that document if they don't know what they're doing. You know, if they haven't been properly lined out and trained on how to do an in-country review. If it's not part of their job. For example, one company I worked for was a medical device company. You have to localize medical device information. It's a requirement. And the person who was responsible for the in-country review for French was also the French medical director. So she was responsible for all the clinical trials in France. So getting her attention on that documentation, which by the way couldn't be sold.
She was a little busy
without it.
Yeah.
Getting her attention was really difficult.
That was a stopper.
Yeah. Gotta make it part of the job.
Well, and then too, like what we have found, like we're really good in every language at keeping things at or under budget. But the only times when our clients, I've been running this company for 9 years, and the only times that we have ever had clients encounter unexpected costs have been an in-country review. And the number one reason was, despite the fact that we have it on our quote, really big, we have a whole paragraph on the quote that says, if you are doing in-country review, please let us know before the project begins to avoid unexpected costs. They don't tell us.
Yep.
And then what happens is it's not even necessarily who's doing the changes, but it's the way the changes come in and when the changes come in. If you send it to me a year later, yes, I'm going to charge you for that. I'm sorry. It's been a year.
One thing that I see coming up again and again, and it ties in with what you were talking about, both with localization and how it relates to simplified technical English. But more and more, it seems that the concepts that we all discuss are turning into the same large snowball. We've got the STE, we've got minimalism, we've got structure, we have reuse, we have accessibility. All of these things tend to support each other in consistency and intent and context. And I think, I think it's worth noting that those are commonality. There is a lot of commonality there, and that by shoring up one or the other, you're actually shoring up the whole.
Well, and it's like if you're a hiker or a marathon runner, which I used to be a hiker and have never and never will be a marathon runner. but like if you're a hiker or a marathon runner, like there are clearly marked like arrows, like they're cut into trees and spray painted on roads. And, like they tell you where to go next. This path, like the path from content management to translation management, despite the fact that Kit and I are presenting on a gap, it's like a hiking trail. Like if you logically start out and you don't veer off, you can stay on it. Now, if you veer off, yes, it's going to be scenic. Yes, it's going to be fun. Yes, you might eventually get to the end just the same, but you also might turn your ankle. It's all very
more likely the cliff.
What'd you say? I didn't hear you, Matt.
Please, cliff.
Oh yeah. Kit said, or go off a cliff, and I said, oh yeah, probably that one. Yeah. Great. Well, it sounds like a very interesting presentation, and I think one of the great reasons for doing this is to allow people to self-select. So when we look at the folks that are at LavaCon that are going to be looking at their strategy for content localization, for reuse, for simplified technical English, this will give them a chance to see what it is they can expect beyond the title I gave at the beginning of this interview. But the space between us, managing expectations between Tec Comm and localization, and then that brief interview or the brief bio or description that you'll have in the directory, right? So this gives people to kind of get a sense of whether or not they want or need more. Yeah. Well, great. And so other than LavaCon, I know, Kit, you have got to be as busy as I know the last two presidents were before you. How's your presidency treating you?
Oh, everything's great so far. We have a great team and making lots of good changes that I think will help the organization, help our members, and make us a stronger organization over the future.
Fantastic. Well, I always look forward to the summit in the spring, so we'll look forward to that one. My wife always complains because seems to always be a conference in and around Cinco de Mayo. So she says,
big family holiday in the Sullivan house.
Not so much, but in Southern California, it tends to be a bit of a celebration. Okay. So when you get this close to the border, it's tough to, even though it's not an official Hispanic holiday. There's any good reason to party in Southern California, I think, is what they say. Great. And then also with you, Terena, you got anything else going on conference-wise, book-wise?
Very, very busy. Speaking at LavaCon, and then after Kit and I's presentation, I have got one the last day where I'm comparing content to bourbon and beer. So that should be lots of fun.
So you're going to get me at two sessions then.
If you want to, sure. Yeah, but I highly encourage folks to come. Mine will be a whole lot looser than the one we're doing together. The one that we're going to do together is much better. Trust me.
There we go.
And then I'm speaking at localization a couple of weeks after LavaCon, which is in Vancouver.
Yeah. And where is Localization World this year?
It's in Vancouver.
In Vancouver, okay.
Yeah, we're both presenting. You're doing a pre-conference. Actually, I'm doing a pre-conference day with Taos machine translation. You're doing a pre-conference as well.
I'm doing pre-conference workshops, one on introduction to global content strategy and one on client management.
Okay.
Great.
That one's more oriented for localization managers to learn how to work with document and content development teams.
Okay.
Great. Well, for all those sessions, feel free to ship me links to the registration and your sessions and all that. Be happy to put it in the write-up. This will be on my YouTube channel as well as the TecCommTools.com site, and so we'll get that written up with some clickable links and hopefully get some more people to your sessions in those conferences as well.
Great, thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks to both of you. We'll finish this up right now, and we'll look forward to seeing you all at LavaCon.
Appreciate your having us, Matt. Thank you.
Time, Matt.
You're very welcome.
Take care.
Bye.